You gotta hate it when that happens.
Redneck Gunworks!
Hey, welcome to Redneck Gunworks. We're back out in the woods today. And one thing we definitely want to talk to you about is how all of this is trying to get into your firearms when you go out in here in the woods and out on your adventures. Just how much of the adventure you take home in your weapons and how to get that out. So we want to make sure that you do a good job of that, because in order for a weapon to function, it has to be clean, it has to be in good working order, and so we're going to give you the tips and tricks to do that. Here's 9 ways that you may be cleaning your gun wrong. Stay tuned. Hi guys, this is the model. Way 1 is takedown. To properly clean a gun, it must be field stripped. And each firearm has a takedown point that can be achieved without invasive procedures, complicated techniques, and tools. Your firearm should be taken down to that level to properly clean all the surfaces that are negatively affected by dirt, burnt, and unburnt powders. The manufacturer of your firearm actually designed it to be taken down to a certain point. I suggest that you definitely do that. It's called field stripping for a reason. It can usually be done fairly quickly and without a whole lot of tools. So if you're cleaning your firearm, please take it down to that point. It was designed to be done that way. That way you can get all the crud, all the gunk out of it, and you can actually oil it in the places that it needs to be oiled. We'll talk more about oiling later, and we'll definitely talk more about knowledge of particular firearms later on, but definitely learn that takedown point, because that will allow you that access that we so greatly need to be able to do a good job on our firearms. Number 2 is cleaning equipment. Have you ever noticed how much stuff we keep around us for doing everything else in our lives, but somehow with a firearm we think that bore snake and a Q-tip are going to clean the entire firearm? Well, the fact of the matter is that that's really just not going to happen. Minimum gear should be a cleaning rod or a bore snake, soft bristled brush. You can use a toothbrush, just make sure it's clean. Solvent, oil, a cleaning cloth. An old t-shirt usually works for that if you don't want to spend the money on a good cloth. Don't forget a flashlight and any tools that are necessary to field strip your firearm. And yes, you can even use Q-tips. Number 3 is chemicals. And chemicals is kind of a big subject with this. There's a lot of people who say, well, this chemical is better than this chemical, or this chemical here, is the new thing. But I can tell you this, as a general rule, whatever chemical you're using needs to be formulated for firearms. I see a lot of people trying to use things that aren't formulated for firearms on their firearms, particularly oils and things like that. Those chemicals need to be designed to handle the environment within the firearm. It needs to be formulated for the metals that are there. It needs to be formulated for the polymers, especially in the newer types of firearms. And it needs to handle the heat extremes and not react poorly with burnt and unburnt powder residues. That's really important because it can actually stop your gun from functioning if you use the wrong. And in the long term, it could actually ruin the finish or cause permanent damage with your gun. Definitely check with the manufacturer and see if it's formulated for a firearm. The best rule of thumb, though, is buy it where you buy your firearms. Things go together there. Definitely what we're saying is this. There's so many different chemicals out there to use on your firearms that there's no need to actually go outside of the gun world to try to use something else as a hack or as a short go in it. I know some of the chemicals can be kind of pricey for the bottle up front, but trust me, a lot of that stuff lasts for a long time, especially the bottles of oil and that sort of stuff. So it's a great investment. Definitely one thing I want to say though is when you're picking your chemicals, make sure and pick a chemical that not only cleans, but leaves a protective barrier behind. All of the new chemicals out there seem to be able to do that. You can actually get some that are kind of in a one-stop shopping kind of a scenario where it cleans, it lubes, and protects. We use a lot of chemicals like that here because it cuts down on how many different types of chemical we have to keep on hand, but at the same time allows us to know that we're doing a good job, not only cleaning, but it's also providing a good barrier for lubrication and protection. So check out some of those chemicals and We'll move on. Number 4 is cleaning the entire firearm. That kind of goes along with field stripping it. Remember that takedown point. If you take it down, then you have access to clean the entire firearm. But also, don't forget those little areas like your magazines and little nooks and crannies that are inside of the firearm itself. A lot of times we neglect those areas, and what happens is we end up shoving dirt and debris back up into a clean firearm. You do that enough and it will cause problems, especially running dirty ammo from a dirty magazine up into a clean bore. You can actually change your bore and cause some significant damage. So definitely don't do that, especially as easily nowadays as some of the modern firearms are to clean in those magazine areas. Definitely field stripping on those usually doesn't take tools, so you can break them down, get them clean, get them put back together. Remember, look at all those areas. Every time I break down a firearm, that's what I'm looking for, is not only just the regular cleaning areas, but what have I missed? So think about those areas, clean the entire gun. Definitely research your gun. We're going to talk more about that so that you'll be able to identify those areas. It just makes for a smarter clean, a better clean, and a better experience with your firearm. 5 is tools. And this is a pretty serious point for me because I see so many firearms that are just torn up because people use the wrong tools. There is no real reason for not using the right tool because it just causes so much damage when you don't. Make sure you use the proper tool. That's really a whole lot that I can say about that. But also make sure that your tool is in good working order. You know, if you got to use a punch, make sure that it's brass or synthetic. And make sure it has a nice flat face on it. Never, ever, never use a nail punch or a center punch. All that does is damage the pins and the stuff that you're trying to push out with those. Likewise, any screwdrivers or Torx bits or anything like that, make sure that they have a nice flat finish on them, that they address the part very nicely, that they go in tight and snug. Make sure they're not prone to camming out or slipping when you apply the right amount of force to it. I guess when in doubt, just if you're not sure of the tool, take the tool, clean it up, and look at it. It's worth the time so that you don't tear up your firearm or strip out a screw, or especially one of those little Torx or Allen head bolts that can be in there, or screws that can be in there, because it can cause a real nightmare and it can be very expensive. When just using the proper tool would be a good thing. Lastly on that is make sure that all of your cleaning equipment is in good shape as well. You certainly don't want to use something that's harsh or has abrasives in it when you're cleaning your firearm. Make sure that your brushes are clean and in good order. Make sure that they have nylon or some soft metal. If you have to use a metal type brush, make sure it's like copper or brass or something like that. Never use a steel brush on your firearm to clean it unless you really just want to take all the finish off and change the surfaces. Make sure that all of your cleaning equipment is clean, in good working order. And lastly, never ever ever push anything dirty or not in good shape down the bore of your rifle. Just please don't ever do it. That's probably one of the more sensitive areas on your gun. In my opinion, it's the most sensitive area, especially when you're dealing with accuracy. So never put anything down the barrel that's dirty or nasty or not in proper working order. That brings us to number 6, and that's cleaning the bore. It's one-way traffic on this one for the most part. There's one exception, we'll talk about that. But patches, snakes, jags, that sort of stuff should always start from the bore and make their way out the end of the barrel. The reason for that is because we don't want to push any solvents, oils, or grime, particulates, all that nasty stuff back into the action of the gun. So we start at the bore and we work it out the end of the barrel. It adds just a different element to it if you want to know the truth of it. I've seen people clean from the other end and they end up just pushing all that contamination right back into the action, and then it just complicates things. Start in the action, push it out the end of the bore, life is good. Also, it goes with the continuity of the barrel, and that barrel is designed for things to start in the bore and go out the end of the barrel. So it just goes in line with that continuity. Now, I said that there was one exception, and that is brushes. Saying that a brush can only go one way through the barrel would be like saying that you can only brush your teeth in one direction. That would be kind of funny because you would miss half of your teeth. It's the same way with brushes in the bore. Definitely you want to work that brush up and down the barrel, but don't pull the brush all the way back out into the action or out into the breech. Once it goes into the breech, work it from the breech to the barrel, to the end of the barrel, back to the breech, to the end of the barrel. Also, with that being said, you don't want to shove anything all the way out the end of the barrel until you're completely done with it. That includes jags, patch holders, or anything like that. The reason for that is if you run the implement all the way out the end of the barrel, then it actually goes out, and imagine that it goes out and sags to the end of the barrel laying on the rod. When you pull it back through, that rod has to hit that joint where the implement, the patch or the jag or whatever, is joined to it, and then it pulls it back up into the barrel. That point of the barrel has rifling, just like the rest of the barrel, and you will actually erode the rifling at the bottom of that point. When you do that, it grossly affects your accuracy of that firearm, so never, ever, ever do that. Never push anything all the way back and then jerk it back through the barrel because you're eroding that. So a few little tips there about cleaning the bore. Make sure, once again, and use the proper chemicals on that. Make sure and read about the chemicals. Don't just take any old solvent, put it in there, run it down the bore, and let it sit for any amount of times. Each chemical is designed to do a specific function in the bore. Make sure that you have the information about the chemicals that you're using on the bore of your rifle, because you don't want to erode the lands and grooves, the rifling that's inside that barrel. A pitted, nasty barrel with bad rifling is an inaccurate rifle, and it's just bad overall. So hope that helped you out on that, and let's move on. That brings us to number 7, and number 7 is lubricants. Lubricants are kind of a touchy subject with people, so we'll try to tread lightly. But I can tell you this, a lot of people feel that if a little oil is good, then a lot of oil would be great. But that's not always true. Think about the part that you're putting the lubricant on. Some parts move a lot, some parts move a little. Some parts get sprayed with hot gases and particulates coming out of the barrel. They're coming out of your gas tubes and that sort of stuff. So you definitely don't want to have those surfaces wet where they would actually pick up those contaminants that would stick to it. In other words, what I'm saying is that's a problem, and it's probably one of the most common problems that we see in firearms is over oiling those firearms, and then that wet sticky oil, that wet sticky lubricant attracts dirt, grime, and grit inside the surfaces of the firearm, and they cause it to not act the way that it's supposed to act. It also prematurely wears the firearm. It can change the surfaces on there, it can erode finishes away, and it can actually erode protective films away. So you definitely don't want to do that. You want to make sure and oil that part according to what that part is doing. Parts that don't move a whole lot don't need a lot of oil. As a general rule, think about what that part's going to be doing and just oil accordingly. If you have any questions to that, there's definitely a lot of information out there. Check with that chemical manufacturer's webpage in their FAQs on recommended ways to use the product. There's also a lot of information from your local gunsmiths, or go to where you buy your firearms. If all else fails, pop it in our comments. We definitely want to try to help you out, and if we don't know the answer, maybe one of our other commenters do. We can definitely find the answer for you. You can go to redneckgunworks.com and leave us a message there as well, and we'll try to get the information to you. One thing we definitely want to do is for you to oil and lubricate those firearms in a proper way so that you can go out and enjoy your adventure. Number 8 is kind of a biggie too, and that's proper surface area. Now, why don't we just call that proper work area? This is definitely a common mistake, and I find myself making this mistake all too often. There's a whole lot going on. I need to break a gun down and clean it real quick. Let's say we've been working on it and a customer's coming to pick it up. Make sure that you have enough room to do the operation. Definitely have room for the firearm, have room for your tools, all the parts are going to need to come out and go somewhere, and then leave about 50% of your workspace for actually working on the gun. The reason why I say that is because all too often we go to put a gun back together when we violate that rule, and we've got a part that got knocked on the floor, we've got a part that could possibly get damaged by being knocked onto the concrete floor or even lost. Also, we run the bad habit of putting clean parts next to dirty parts, and you can get cross-contamination in some pretty vital areas. It's just a bad idea. So make sure that you have plenty of room and that it's in an area that's stable so everything doesn't get knocked in the floor. And also, one little thing that we've learned here in the shop, especially when working on older firearms, is try to work in a well-lit, clean environment, because gun parts like to go flying sometimes. And so we definitely don't want you to do that in some crowded or harsh environment where parts go flying, you never find them again. It's just a pain in the butt, and it can be pretty expensive. So hope that helped you out, and let's move on. Number 9, last but not least, is knowledge of your firearm. With all the information available in the world today, we have access to schematics, how-to videos, and all sorts of DIY information. On almost every type of firearm, we actually have the ability to look inside the firearm before we disassemble it. And that's a really cool tool to have at our disposal nowadays. It allows us to actually mark the procedure for taking the firearm down. It also allows us to look at those problem areas. And remember, we were talking about those springs and stuff that like to go flying across the shop? You can actually look at those before they come out and kind of get your mind wrapped around on how we need to do that. It's a really cool tool to have in our arsenal these days. Definitely, I like it. You know, we used to collect mounds and mounds and mounds of old American Rifleman magazines and all kinds of different schematics, and we used to keep bookshelves full of it that we'd actually have to go and manually look that stuff up. In today's world, it's just so nice to be able to point and click, look at those schematics, look at somebody who's actually owns the firearm that knows how to break it down, to find some gunsmith who will actually talk about it. Use those resources because they're so valuable in actually breaking down the firearm, cleaning the firearm, knowing what you're doing, seeing inside the gun ahead of time. It makes it less experimentation and more practical application. So definitely we encourage you to do a little research before opening that gun up. It makes your experience a whole lot more pleasant, it makes it a whole lot safer, and definitely saves a lot of damage, wear and tear on your firearms. Okay, so what did we learn? Well, hopefully we learned that it's all about understanding the firearm and utilizing the proper techniques to make your experience safe, reliable, and more enjoyable. Now, we know that this hasn't been a completely exhaustive report on all types of firearms, but we hope that we did give you some information, some good reliable information, and some good rules of thumb, so that when you do start to delve into cleaning your firearm or doing any kind of a maintenance on your firearm, that you would definitely apply these principles, because they're all things that we had to learn the hard way for the most part. Hopefully it comes from our years of experience to you, that you'll be able to have a better experience with it and not do like we did and learn some of these the hard way, especially with flying springs. So thank y'all for watching. We hope that you enjoyed it. We hope that you learned something, and more importantly, we hope that this helps you go out and have a great adventure. We'll see you out there.
Redneck Gun Works!
Yeah, you gotta hate it when that happens. It won't even fire. Ugh. That's nasty. How in the world did that happen? nearly almost cut my titty off.